Everybody, welcome to Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. We've got a Q&A for you today, so if you've got nutritional questions you'd like me to answer, go ahead and start typing those in now. I'll do my best in the next hour or so to get as many answered as I can. And don't forget to take advantage of our sale this week and you know, take care of our sponsor, Gluten-free Society. You can use promo code HEALTH and save on all immune products. If you're trying to bolster your immune system, support your immune system, especially during this spring allergy season, again, use promo code HEALTH and you'll save on any products at Gluten-free Society that are immune-oriented. So, let's dive into your questions. Are cataracts an inevitable part of aging? Is there a way to prevent them? So cataracts are not necessarily inevitable. Not everybody has cataracts, you know, to horrific degrees as they age. Many people actually don't end up getting them at all. And so that being said, I wouldn't call them inevitable. I would say deterioration of the eye over time, as with aging, is part of what is inevitable. But what do you do to try to prevent them the best that you can? As you eat well, right? There's 6 fundamental things that you want to do consistently to protect and preserve, not just your eyes, but any organ, any tissue, any aspect of your body. Number 1 is eat a good diet. You can't get healthy or stay healthy eating food that's not healthy. And so be honest with yourself, you know, when picking up your fork. Number 2 is adequate sleep. Number 3, adequate sunshine. Number 4, exercise. Number 5, clean air. Number 6, clean water. Do those 6 things consistently throughout your life to protect and preserve the integrity of your aging. And you'll go far. Now, some people use eye nutrients, and there are a number of different nutrients that have been purported to be extremely healthy and preventative of things like cataracts. As a matter of fact, what I'll do is I'll post a link in the feed for you, Dahlia. And I want you to go check this out because it's all about the eyes and nutrition, vitamins and minerals and other nutrients that are very, very helpful to, again, to prevent different types of eye problems and to help support your eye functionality as you go through life. Let's see here. What's the safest anesthesia for a celiac who needs surgery? I don't think we could say there's one that we would call out, as much as I would say check with your surgeon and check with the anesthesiologist. And what you want to do is you want to get an active and an inactive ingredient list of the medications that they're recommending that you have to, you know, to put you under. And this doesn't just include the anesthesia, because a lot of times you'll get an IV with different surgeries. You can get an IV antibiotic as a preventative. So just be aware and get an inactive ingredient list of all the different medicines they're going to want to do or want to use with you, and then cross-reference them. Can we put up a link maybe for hidden ways they can hide gluten? It's the long list of different terms that could indicate a product contains gluten. So cross-reference the drugs and active ingredient list with this list and make sure that you're not going to get accidentally glutened as you embark on that surgical procedure. What do you think of IV glutathione and ozone? I think it depends on the indication and why the doctor might want to do them. I think they can be helpful in certain situations, and I think, you know, so I'm not opposed to them by any stretch, but I think it also, again, it just depends on why they're wanting to do it. I don't think healthy people necessarily need to go get IV glutathione or IV ozone, but I think if you're trying to overcome or recover from chronic, long-term inflammatory self-poisoning, whether it be through food or through environmental pollutants like mold, mycotoxins, heavy metals, etc., I think they can be effective tools in that regard. Let's see, after an upper respiratory infection, took antibiotics, now left with a dry cough. Doctor gave me prednisone. Don't really want to start it. What do you recommend to take to stop the cough? Well, I mean, Lily, I would say that if you have a dry cough after an antibiotic, number 1, and this is what I would recommend to anybody who's taking an antibiotic do immediately, and that's be on high-dose probiotic during the antibiotic, but also at least 2 weeks after you're done with the antibiotic. The product I recommend that's high dose is called Ultrabiotic Defense. Antibiotics wipe out your flora. And so you want to do your best to support a repopulation of that flora. And that's why, if you're going to go on the antibiotic, be aware you should also be on the probiotic. Now, don't take them simultaneously. Don't take your antibiotic with the probiotic at the same time. Give yourself a couple of hour gap. So if you take the antibiotic, wait 2 hours, take your probiotic. But that should be done during the course of antibiotics, but also at least 2 weeks, posterior the antibiotic or on the tail side. The other thing you might try is NAC, N-acetylcysteine. N-acetylcysteine is very beneficial in terms of immune system support, and a lot of people find that post colds, flus, and other types of problems, they get tremendous benefit in clearing their lungs using N-acetylcysteine. It's actually a mucogenic agent, or not a mucogenic, I'm sorry, that's the wrong word. It's a mucolytic agent, meaning it helps to break up mucus deep in the lungs. And so if you've got a cough, it can kind of help expectorate the lungs to that extent, and might help you resolve that. Let's see here. A lot of comments, but let's see here. Penny wants to know, how does one know what's the right diet for themselves? So Penny, so there's a few rules. Number one, there's 3 rules of eating, right? Where if you're trying to assess, what the right diet is for you. Number one is understand that the right diet is real food first, as a general rule of thumb. Now, some people are allergic or intolerant to different foods. And so that's rule number 2, is don't eat what you're allergic or intolerant to. Now, part of how you can determine that is paying attention to how you feel when you eat. So, and that's actually rule number 3, is if a food disagrees with you, if your body rejects it, through symptoms, then you listen to your body. Don't mask it. And, a lot of people will eat a food, they'll get heartburn, and instead of avoiding that food, they'll start taking Tums or Rolaids or, antacid medications. It's a mistake. So again, number 1 is eat real food. Number 2, don't eat what you're allergic or intolerant to. And number 3, listen to your body. So you can follow rules 1 and 3 without any kind of testing. Those 2 rules are free. You just have to follow them. Now, if you want to get specific testing, which many people find tremendously beneficial, to do what's called a delayed hypersensitivity test to measure to see whether or not there are any foods causing kind of low levels of chronic inflammation in the body. We actually offer that at Gluten-free Society because so many doctors refuse to do it in their patients. We've made it available to the general public. So if you want to check that out, I'll put a link below for you. But that's where I would start. The other thing that a lot of people aren't sure whether or not a gluten-free diet is right for them. You might consider taking our quiz or doing genetic testing for gluten. So I mean, there are ways to help to assess using technology what diet is best for you. But ultimately, the first step is to just be astute and pay attention to how you feel yourself. And then if you're failing in that, if you're still symptomatic and still struggling, then you go on to that next level, which is testing. Could a child with hearing loss and ADD benefit from a carnivore diet? Maybe and maybe not. I would say a carnivore diet is a pretty aggressive move. If for a child with hearing loss and ADD, potentially I would start with no grain, no pain. And that way, because some people do really well with carnivore diets, and there's a lot of nuance to why people are finding a carnivore diet to be helpful. And but a better place, in my opinion, to start is a no grain, no pain diet. And this is because, 1, it's not quite as restrictive, but 2, it cuts out the same thing that carnivore diets cut out. The bulk of why I believe carnivore diet patients respond and feel so much better is because they're cutting grain out of their diet. So I would always say start with a grain-free diet first, and then if you're still symptomatic and still struggling, then you might again investigate looking at what other foods could be potential triggers. But we know for sure, there have been a number of studies, and I've seen this anecdotally in a number of cases, where ADD benefits tremendously from a grain-free diet. As far as hearing loss, I would say it depends on the type of hearing loss. and the mechanism behind why it's happening. If that mechanism is neural inflammation, gluten grains can be neural inflammatory agents, right? So they potentially could help. And I've seen people with lots of hearing problems do better on grain-free diets. Why do some people that have unhealthy diets fail to develop chronic disease? One prominent example is Warren Buffett. Well, I don't agree with you, Dennis. I would say, Warren Buffett is a private person and probably is not going to speak about any kind of major public health issue or major health issues in public. I hear this a lot. People would tell me, well, my aunt, my uncle, and these are actually patients of mine that'll come in and say, well, my aunt, my uncle, my brother, my sister, whoever, right? They're just fine and they're eating these things. And then what ends up happening is that same relative they were talking about ends up becoming a patient too, because they weren't really just fine. They just weren't really open about talking about it, and they were very stoic in their life. So I would say that. And then I would also say that there are people that do things less healthfully, but and don't on the outward surface appear to be dramatically impacted to the level that's obvious. But there are genetic differences amongst people, and some people it's just like the people that can smoke their whole life and never develop lung cancer, the people that can drink alcohol like a fish in water and not have major liver issues. But don't bet on that being the case in your own life would be my advice, because those people are unique in their own rights and have different maybe detoxification pathways that are much more prominently developed. So again, if we're talking about risk management to try to avoid disease, the best thing to do is not to have terrible behaviors, right? And we can say that very consistently across the board. Can you explain why pea protein and soy products are bad for health? I'm not opposed to pea protein. What I'm opposed to, if somebody is navigating or coming upon, the no grain, no pain diet, and they're new to it, and they've struggled for years with gastrointestinal inflammation and dysfunction, peas are not one of the best things to eat. Legumes in general are not going to be one of the best choices in food. And soy is a legume, and pea is also a legume. And the reason why is they contain oxalate and phytate and lectins that can be inflammatory, but can also be very, very challenging to break down and digest. They also contain different types of anti-nutritive substances that can damage the GI tract. And so if your gut's already damaged, these foods can kind of prolong that recovery. So when I'm talking about, and if you've read my book, No Grain, No Pain, when I'm talking about phase 2 of the diet, which is to avoid legumes, that's the reason why. It's not that necessarily legumes need to be avoided forever, but they certainly should be avoided until we have a good recovery of GI tract health and functionality. Beyond that, it's quality, right? Soy, 99% of soy grown in the U.S. is GMO, and so it's got, aside from being genetically modified, it's got glyphosate residue all over it because, the crops themselves are double doused in poison. In my opinion, glyphosate's a poison, so it's something I would avoid eating even if I didn't have a problem with soy. So I ordered some meat with 23% organ meat mixed in. Can I consume this daily? Yeah, you can. If you're concerned about anything, where most people will claim concern, and I don't agree with this necessarily, is that liver can be very high in vitamin A. But you're talking about 23% mixed in organ meats, not just pure liver as a large dose every day. So I wouldn't worry so much about a vitamin A toxicity in that regard, but you should be just fine. If you're really concerned by that, you can always ask your doctor to test you, a couple months in, just to make sure you're not seeing that happen. Are there any sweeteners that you approve of? There are, but I will say this as well. I approve of stevia. I approve of xylitol. particularly though birchwood xylitol, not just any xylitol, because some xylitols are derived from corn. As two sweeteners, monk fruit is reasonably okay. Maple, organic maple is okay as a sweetener. Honey is okay as a sweetener. But I don't recommend that sweeteners be a staple food in anyone's diet. And this is, I think, the differentiation. A lot of people say, what can I have? And then they go and they have that all the time and they have an overabundance of it. I think any sweetener, even if it's a non-caloric sweetener, is going to have the potential to create a hormone trigger that spikes insulin and creates a blood sugar and insulin fluctuation. So if you're doing them consistently in high doses over time, you can be damaging to your body's regulatory ability to understand, glucose and insulin and the interaction and interplay between those two, so that you can extrapolate calories from the energy that you eat. And that's what I have to say about sweeteners. I'm not opposed to them, but I just don't think you should make them, a big part of your diet. What causes anhydrosis? For a lot of people, and what that is not really sweating very well, is what that equates to. Lack of sweating causes less sweating. And that sounds silly, right? Your body gets really good at what it does more of. And so if you want to sweat more and you're not a good sweater, number one is expose yourself to heat and exercise. A lot of people, when they exercise in the air-conditioned environment, and so sweating is less, we'll just say less aggressive in that type of environment because the temperature's being controlled. But if you really want to help your body learn how to better sweat, exercise at natural temperatures outside. Now, if you live in Arizona, it's 120 degrees outside, be careful. Don't go out there and kill yourself or dehydrate. But, if we're talking about, spring and summer weather, you should exercise in that ambient temperature and, let your body sweat. Now, some people do really well by prompting sweat by using things like infrared saunas. And so the more of these things you do, the better you sweat. And so even to the level that when you stop doing those things, you continue to sweat better. But like anything else, it's the more you exercise your muscles, the bigger they get. The more you exercise your sweat glands, the more effective and functional they become. I was told by a nutrition coach that omega supplements aren't good to take because in the long run they throw off omega balance. Is this true? Not really. I think part of it depends on the type of omega supplement that you're using. A lot of omega supplements are super high DHA, which is a type of omega-3, and they have very low levels of EPA. And so if we're talking about that particular supplement, yeah, that can throw off your balance. But if you take a nice blended equal version of EPA plus DHA, you shouldn't have any problems long term. And I would argue I've done thousands and thousands of omega tests in patients over the past few decades. And I would argue that it's very, very hard to follow a diet in any industrialized country and actually get adequate EPA from the food that you're eating, unless you're just eating, cold water fish a couple of times a day, which most people don't. Even though grass-fed beef has omega-3, it's just not enough. And humans need, in order of magnitude, on a regular basis, a couple of grams of omega-3 EPA and DHA a day, and it's just really hard to achieve with diet, and especially with plant-based diets, because there's no EPA in plant-based diets to speak of. It's you get what's called alpha-linolenic acid or ALA, which is pre-omega-3, but many people don't convert it very well. And I've yet to find, in all the testing I've done over 21 years of practice, I've yet to find a person trying to maintain healthy omega levels using things like flax or chia. I've yet to see a person who could actually bring their EPA levels up to what human standards need for optimal health. So I don't agree with that statement. I think omega supplements are a good idea, but the quality and the type that you take matters. And so that's really where it's important to understand what you're actually taking. How do you deal with SIBO? That's a big question, Bart. I would say First of all, I challenge the diagnosis of SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, because it's based on a presumption that because hydrogen or methane gases are being produced at high quantities, that is actually, that the bacteria in the small intestine are actually the cause. And that presumption, in my experience anyway, has oftentimes been wrong. I've had numerous people come to me after having positive SIBO tests that really, they were on rifaximin and Xifaxan, which are different kinds of antibiotics, and they still didn't recover from so-called SIBO. So first and foremost, I would always challenge, if that's actually what it is. And I like the term better than small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. I like the term imbalance, so microbial imbalance within the GI tract. And so I think first and foremost, it's important to run the right assessment of the GI tract, where you look at the microbiome itself and all of its wonder and splendor, and not just run a hydrogen methane gas test, because those can be misleading and misrepresentative. But there are a lot of different strategies to handle it if that's what it is. But if you go mainstream medical, you're probably going to get a drug like rifaximin, which is an antibiotic. If you go kind of more along the lines of a natural practitioner, a lot of them are going to recommend different things like berberine or uva ursi and other herbal-based, plant-based products that have natural antibacterial activities. But I think at the end of the day, the best thing to do is assess your microbiome and actually determine what's the problem, so that you can get a better guide on how to deal with it. Let's see here. If you tested sensitive to chicken eggs, will you always be sensitive to them, or can you add them back into your diet? If you're talking about, depending on what type of test that you took, Martha. So if you tested, and you were acutely IgE allergic to eggs, you'd be real careful about ever adding them back in, because acute allergies oftentimes don't go away. If you're talking about a delayed hypersensitivity response, similar to the way we test them at Gluten-free Society, then yeah, you wait 6 to 8 months. And you can make an attempt to add them back in, but I don't really recommend that people add back in food sensitivities without rechecking to make sure they're not still sensitive to them, because delayed reactions are not always something you're going to feel aggressively. They're something that can still cause chronic low levels of inflammation. So Jessica's asking what kind of olive oil I use at home, and I keep telling you, Jessica, that I'm going to get you that answer, and I apologize because I've been tardy with it, and I'm going to be tardy again with it today. I believe it's an Italian brand, or it's made in Italy for sure. I know that, and I'll have to get back with you. Maybe other folks in the feed can comment on what they're using in terms of healthy, real olive oil that's not spiked with other types of seed oils. How can you help detox the liver? I think the number one rule of any detox program, Connie, should be to identify what the toxins are first that you're trying to detoxify, and whether or not you're still being exposed to them. So I get a lot of people that just want to do a liver detox, and it's just generically, how do I detox my liver? But they have no concern about whether or not, or what they're currently doing that is actually exposing their liver to any variety or degree of toxins. So first and foremost is don't retox if you're going to do a detox, because your body is always detoxing, right? Your liver is always working to cleanse. It's always working to basically to deconjugate and to break down different poisons to make them water soluble, so that you can excrete them through the urine, or that you can excrete them into the GI tract to get out of the body. So you're always detoxing. Now, there are certainly supplements that you can use to support liver function. N-acetylcysteine is a fantastic choice. Milk thistle, standardized to contain silymarin, is a fantastic choice. Glutathione is a good choice. Alpha-lipoic acid, vitamin C, selenium. So these are all nutrients that are very valuable that the liver needs in order to support its detoxification capacity. We actually have a formula, a liver support formula called Ultra Liver Detox that you might look into. We can put a link in for you if you'd like. Thoughts on safety of breast augmentation? That's a tough one, Heidi. There's different reasons why a woman might make that decision, and far be it from me to judge any of them. And in some cases where there's, a mastectomy from cancer, breast reconstruction. I think, if we're talking about the safety, I think number one, if we're trying to do it and a woman has made up her mind that that's what she's going to do, regardless of why, I think number one is it's important that you ask the surgeon to test you for the potential to be reactive to the implants that they want to put in you. Because the side effects of breast augmentation gone wrong, and they don't all go wrong, but one of the side effects when they do go wrong is autoimmune disease. And so we see that because some people are reacting to the actual implant itself. So their body's immune system views it as a foreign object, and so it's going to potentiate or mount an over-aggressive response, which can lead to the development of autoimmune disease. And that's one of the biggest concerns as far as safety goes. Now, a lot of doctors will dismiss that or downplay it. And I would just simply say you can't dismiss or downplay it, because a good percentage of people have breast implant sickness syndromes. And I'm not saying that 99% of all people that go through that surgery have that problem, but it's not uncommon. And I've seen it in a number of cases where having augments removed were part of the solution to a person's health. So I think, one, it's a decision that you have to make, and there are a lot of reasons that may play a role in that. But two, you should be testing yourself for the actual reactivity to the ingredients of the implant itself. And so ask your surgeon for what's called a MSDS, a material safety data sheet on the actual implants, to get the ingredients so that you understand what they're made from, and then ask them to test you to see whether you're reactive to those ingredients before you commit to sealing them up in your body, for 10 years. Concerned about hearing that they are giving mRNA vaccines to cows and pigs, I think was the other one that, I think it was Thomas Renz, the attorney, the U.S. attorney, that made that announcement. Nobody knows actually at this point why that statement was made, or what the source of that statement or where it was coming from. But I know, like here in Texas, the question was asked of the Cattle Association whether or not that was even on the docket, and the answer came back as no, like that's not something they're doing here. I don't know about other states, but I would encourage any of you, wherever you live, is to reach out to your local governments and inquire as to the intent. And demand that our food supplies be protected. I don't think anybody really truly knows at this point whether or not that's something that will happen. I think it's more at this point a rumor than it is an actual confirmed thing. Can grass-fed bone broth help regenerate cartilage? It surely contains nutrients that your cartilage needs to grow and repair itself, Christina. So it's not a bad idea to use that as a food source. Remedy for gallstones instead of surgery. There are a number of thoughts there. Choline and taurine. Choline is a B vitamin-like compound. Taurine is an amino acid, and N-acetylcysteine is a precursor to taurine. And vitamin C can all be helpful for proper bile formation. What happens, and the reason why people form stones, or one of the reasons why they can form stones, is the bile itself is not properly forming, and that can be caused by things like vitamin C and taurine deficits. So these are things that might be very helpful supplementally in your situation, because surgery doesn't resolve why the stone formed. It only takes away the organ and the gallbladder itself. But the stones, if the bile is precipitating and forming stones, that part won't change just because they remove your bile gland. You remember, your bile gland is attached to the liver, and it stores bile, or your gallbladder rather, stores bile, but your liver actually is responsible for producing it and then shipping it to the gallbladder. So find out why you're forming stones. That's, in my opinion, a better option than any surgery. I think gallbladder surgery is one of the top, if not number one. Number two surgical procedures done. And just my experience anecdotally in people that come to see me is that they usually opt for the surgery because of intense, pain, whether it be, frontal gastrointestinal right-sided pain, or whether it be radiative pain to the right shoulder blade area. And a big percentage of these people do not receive relief post-surgically. So the surgery didn't correct the problem, and now they're playing, without a full deck of organs. Once the gallbladder's gone, it's gone. So I always look at surgery as a last resort, not a first choice to make without trying alternatives. Terry says, I have sarcoidosis, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, and celiac. Genomic testing showed bad mitochondria. So you don't have bad mitochondria. You might have some mutation, but there's no such thing as bad mitochondria, Terry. I want to point that out because I don't want you to be hopeless that your mitochondria are somehow bad. Mitochondria, your genes, go back up because I'm still reading it. Your genes are a gift. They're not a curse. You don't have bad ones, not unless you're born with genetic disease. Like if you're born with Down syndrome or, one of the inborn errors of metabolism, that's different. But, your condition is not that. You need to go no grain, no pain as just a first step. You could certainly try carnivore, but if you're blood type A, that would probably be a mistake for you. Blood type A's generally don't process meat at high quantities very well. They generally, in my experience, do pretty well with organ meat, but when you start adding things like bison and beef, they don't feel well. It backs them up, it constipates them, and they don't process or digest it well. So, start with no grain, no pain. It's not a carnivore diet, but it is a no grain diet, and it will, in my experience, a lot of people with sarcoidosis find tremendous improvement, making that diet change. Now, if you've got chronic inflammatory response syndrome as well, that's kind of a generic term, but a lot of people associate that, Terry, with mold. So if you're in mold, you got to figure that part out, because no matter what you do with your diet, if you're in mold and you're being bombarded by mycotoxins, then no amount of diet change is gonna help you recover unless you deal with the mold issue first. So I would suggest you follow up with your doctor and ask him to measure mycotoxin levels, and that's a simple urine test that can be done to rule out whether or not you're being mold exposed in your home. Because like I said, if that's the case, you're not going to find a recovery through diet change, at least not the recovery you're looking for. Could you explain D3 supplements and its association with rat poison? There isn't one. I don't know. I mean, if there is one, enlighten me, but I'm not aware of vitamin D and its association with rat poison. I'm aware of warfarin, which was a rat poison, and it's an anticoagulant. So what it does is it blocks vitamin K. So maybe you heard somebody talking about that association, but there isn't one to my knowledge with vitamin D. It's more along the lines of warfarin and vitamin K. Talking about a vitamin C flush, what should be expected starting taking vitamin C in the morning? How long does the effect likely to last? So if you're doing a vitamin C flush and you're doing, about 6 grams every 15 minutes and 3 to 4 ounces of water, most people are going to start having rumbling or gurgling in their gut after 1 or 2 doses, which is about 30 minutes or so in. And many people will find that they start flushing within the hour, so after about 4 or 5 doses. Now that's common, Gaia, but there's also potential that it could take longer. So I would say plan the day to be home if you're doing a flush. Most people are done within 4 hours, but if it takes you longer, you're not going to have to run and find every bathroom in creation, to relieve your bowels if you get stuck with plans. So it's not a good idea to have other plans if you're trying to do a vitamin C flush. Amanda says, why am I just now reacting to corn and rice after being gluten-free for years? It's very common, Amanda. If you haven't read my book, No Grain, No Pain, it's actually what you're experiencing is what we call gluten-free whiplash. It's when people go traditionally gluten-free, wheat, barley, and rye-free, and do feel better. And there's this kind of reprieve of improvement for a time. And then ultimately what happens is they find more and more corn and rice substitute-based products and items in their diets, and then they start to whiplash backwards because they're still getting forms of gluten, albeit corn and rice gluten are different than wheat, barley, and rye gluten, but they whiplash backward nonetheless. Why should eating garlic give some people gas? Garlic's a FODMAP, and so for some people they don't tolerate certain types of FODMAP very well, and it can create a lot of gas formation. So it's probably the person that you're thinking of, maybe it's even you, is likely struggling to be able to break down and digest FODMAPs in their diet. I've lost the urge or feeling of having a bowel movement. I've tried Motility product, but it didn't have or didn't help. Any suggestions? I'd say you got to get that looked at. A lot of people that lose the urge or the feeling for that bowel movement, there's a neurological issue. And so you could have some nutritional deficits that are, making it harder for your nervous system to properly function and communicate with your bowel's motility mechanism. There could also be food reactivities that are damaging the nerves to the bowel. That's not uncommon either. And there can also be a sympathetic dominance, so the parasympathetic nervous system itself is not turning on adequately so that you're backing up. There's a lot of things to unpack there, Debbie. It's not just one thing. But I would say this: if you've lost your urge, don't play around just trying to figure out what you can take. Because there's a lot of different things you could take. You could try, like we have something called GI Restore, which is a Cape aloe, and then there's cascarata, and there are things like magnesium and vitamin C that can be used to pull water into the bowel and create an osmotic effect. There's laxatives, there's fiber, there's drinking enough water. There's just so many components to that. Maybe what we can do is put up a link to our constipation show that we did a while back, and maybe go through that, but ultimately follow up with a good doctor to get some testing done to help you understand why this is happening. Do more women or men have celiac disease or gluten sensitivity? Well, more women are diagnosed, but there's two things to unpack there, Jane. One is women make more estrogen, men make more testosterone, and estrogen, actually, we believe that more estrogen increases autoimmune potential and less estrogen decreases it. So men would be less likely in that regard if we're looking at just estrogen and testosterone differences. But there's another argument there that we're not 100% sure about, but many researchers speculate. It's that women are usually more in tune with their symptoms and more in tune with their bodies. And so they're more likely to visit a healthcare provider and actually get a confirmatory diagnosis. Whereas men, will stoically, bolster through life. Arms could be falling off and they're still not going to the doctor. That's not all men, but as a general rule, men visit doctors less than women. So the question mark there is: do women have higher prevalence of that class of diseases like celiac or other autoimmune diseases because they visit doctors more and are more likely to get a diagnosis? I believe it's more common in women because of estrogen, but I also believe it's more common because it's more commonly found because women go to the doctor more. Milk thistle for acne helps tremendously to clear my skin, but makes me very emotional. Any other liver supplements less likely to alter my hormones or mental state? Try high-dose vitamin B5. Works really, really well. There have been a couple of studies that show it. High doses of vitamin B5 can work really well in people that are trying to overcome acne problems. Let's see here. Is it bad to take NAC 600 milligrams single time? I don't know if I understand your question. Is it bad to take 600 milligrams of NAC once? No, especially not if you found that it opened up your nose within 10 minutes. Should you take it regularly or occasionally is okay? Both. Some people take it regularly, and especially like during spring and fall allergy season, because NAC is again, it's a mucolytic, so it helps break up mucus and helps keep that stuff moving so it doesn't congest your sinuses or congest your lung fields. But again, it's not something that a person necessarily needs to take every day unless they're finding there's a tremendous benefit for them. I'd say cold and flu season is another common time people like to take it because of the research on NAC showing that people that use it have lower incidence of developing colds, but also if they get them, recover faster and have less a likelihood of a recurrence. So in that regard, you could use it every day just kind of as a preventative support for your immune system. Which micronutrients are okay to be taken on an empty stomach? Well, I think it's easier to answer that question by saying which ones are prone to causing nausea when taken on an empty stomach. I would say B complex. I would say zinc and iron are probably the top three that you just wouldn't want to take those on an empty stomach for their pronicity to potentiate nausea. How do I feel about using black seed oil for eczema and other skin conditions? I think it's fine. Black seed oil has some good nutrients in it, but if your skin condition is being caused by nutritional deficiencies, and you're supporting your diet with black seed oil to regain those nutrients to help your skin, then it's fine. But at the end of the day, anytime we talk about any condition, I think ultimately you want to know why you're having the condition, and that simple home remedies and taking things that have the potential to mask your symptoms without understanding why you're having them is where people get in trouble over long-term periods. So always try to understand why your condition is there first. Is there a link between restless legs and lack of B vitamins or lack of protein? Yes, particularly folate. Folate deficiency. Been a few studies that have correlated that with restless leg, increased incidence of restless leg. There's so my experience with restless leg, there are a lot of different potential possibilities. Gut dysbiosis can contribute to it. Electrolyte imbalances, dehydration, calcium, magnesium deficiency, folate deficiency, yeast overgrowth, common, too much caffeine or other stimulants. A lot of people take prescription Adderall and other stimulants. So lots of different things that can contribute to it. So I'm in mold, trying to move out. Noticed I've got an oxalate sensitivity after taking a beta okra binder. If a carnivore diet won't work for me, how do I find low oxalate foods? I go back to get out. Diet's going to work for you until you get out. You have to be out of the mold. You're never going to recover if you're in it. It just won't happen. A lot of people find, and this is where a lot of people do go carnivore and find tremendous benefit in it, is because they're living in mold and they don't realize it. And you have to understand that when you're living in mold, one of the things that happens is the mold in your environment is immunosuppressive. So it starts to slow down and tank your immune system. And so now you get opportunistic fungus growing inside of you or growing on you. And once that happens, remember that different forms of mold and yeast, when they're growing inside of you, they actually have a biochemical pathway whereby they can actually produce oxalate. So they will generate and drive the production of oxalates up. This is why people develop oxalate sensitivity. And in my experience, this is why a lot of them develop it. They don't have necessarily a true problem with oxalates, but they have a problem with mold and mold colonization driving up oxalate production. And so that's where carnivore is helpful for those individuals. But at the end of the day, you have to get out of the mold. And if the mold is growing in you, you have to get, once you get out of the mold, then your immune system can recover, and then you can get the mold that may be growing in you because of the mold immunosuppression. You can get that mold growing in you out of you. So that's the process. And if you can't shortchange any of that, like I'm just not. I mean, you may prove me wrong, Terry, but I've not yet seen the person that could recover from mold while still living in it. Not fully. I mean, there may be some things that they can do to help them improve transiently, but not fully a recovery. My sister has high cholesterol, and her doctor wants to put her on statins. She doesn't want to be on statins. What alternatives does she have? Let's put up our link to the cholesterol myth. Debbie, share this video. We're going to put it in the feed. Share this video with your sister because you're asking the wrong question. You guys are working from the premise that high cholesterol is even a problem. And I don't work from that same premise. So if you watch this video, you'll understand cholesterol a little bit better, and then you'll understand that there may not need to be an alternative, and that what they're calling a problem is not an actual problem. If a family has a traditional early mortality or death from heart attacks, is that more genetic or could still be nutritional? Possibly both. I mean, there's an argument in biology that it's an ongoing argument, and nobody knows 100% the full answer to even today. And that argument is based on this phrase: nature versus nurture. Right? Is your fate toward disease more genetic, or is it more what you learned growing up, like nurture? Right? So we say, genetic is hardwired, whereas nurture is shared and learned behavior. So generally, when we see strong family histories of heart disease, we can't just call it genetic and sign off and say, sorry, you're going to die early, because parents teach their kids how to eat, and kids that grow up teach their new kids how to eat, right? So there's a nurturing effect. And so if you're eating wrong for who you are, and you have certain genetic predisposition toward heart disease, then you could accelerate that process through not just because of your genes, but because of the nature of the way you learned how to take care of yourself. Again, we learn the importance of health hygiene from our parents typically. And unfortunately, in most industrialized countries, this isn't true of every family, but it's true of I would say most, arguably most, is that they don't have any thought toward a health blueprint for themselves or for their family members. Like they just coast and go through life. And so if that means driving through Chick-fil-A or McDonald's today, or going to Whataburger, if that means eating out at restaurants that serve you GMO foods, if that means drinking sodas, whatever that means, it's not part of a good health plan. It's a bad idea, and it's become the norm in our society. And I would argue that it has more to do with nurture than it does with genetics, but there are people with genetic risks, and so I don't want to dismiss that either. I think if you believe you have familial genetic risk, then you should take extra care and extra caution with your diet and lifestyle. Tanya says, thank you. I've binge watched so many of your videos after being told I have gluten sensitivity. I've checked your book out from the library. That's awesome, Tanya. I hope it's all super helpful in your journey, and come back and let us know how you recover. Going keto, concerned about how it might raise cholesterol. I hear it's not bad, but something about the shape of the cholesterol. Well, it's not so much the shape of the cholesterol, it is the buoyancy of the size. So, there are two types of small particulate LDL that can be problematic. One is apolipoprotein B, and the other is lipoprotein A. And lipoprotein A is not anything, it's genetic. You're not going to change it if you have high levels. There's nothing you're going to really be able to do through diet, medicines, or any other supplementation where you'll lower it. Now, apolipoprotein B is a different matter that can be adjusted for. So measuring those would be a good place to start if you have a concern. But I think most people that worry about cholesterol causing disease don't understand the fact that cholesterol by itself doesn't contribute to cardiovascular disease. You have to have a pre-existing inflammation. Because the reason cholesterol will plaque an artery is not because cholesterol is evil. It's because there's an inflammation process in the arterial wall. And so cholesterol's tendency, its nature, is to go and try to put that fire out. So if you have behaviors that increase the fire, right? If you eat poorly, for example, and you have an inflammatory diet, then your blood vessels are going to become inflamed. And so any cholesterol, those low LDL type size particles, any of those will have a greater tendency toward forming plaques and increasing your potential risk. That's why doctors like to lower cholesterol, because they're blaming cholesterol instead of blaming the inflammation. I would say you have to have the right target in mind. So if going keto for you, Barbara, reduces your inflammatory burden, then even if your cholesterol goes up, it shouldn't really concern you to a huge degree, because you're reducing the inflammation, and so therefore reducing the risk of cholesterol clotting or plaquing or lying down in your arteries and forming plaques. Would you mind sharing your typical weekly diet? You know, usually I don't eat breakfast, so I intermittent fast most days, but you know, it changes pretty regularly. Like last night, as an example, I had a chili. It was mostly meat and herbs and different types of, well, it was a tomato blend, a tomato sauce. We do a paleo-style chili, so, you know, without the bean. You could do beans if you can tolerate beans. I just generally like my diet without them more than I like it with them. And so that was dinner last night, and that'll be lunch today. So that's an example. And I might eat a piece of fruit and a handful of nuts, you know, in the ambient time or the intermittent time between lunch and dinner. But generally, it's whatever we had for dinner, I'll eat again for lunch the next day. Life for me is pretty simple that way. So if we cooked a ribeye, we have a ribeye. If my wife made a meatloaf, then we'll have something like that. And whatever veg that we're cooking. So whether it be something like asparagus or cabbage or spinach or Brussels sprouts or cauliflower, you know, just a variety in that regard. I keep fruit to a smaller minimum. I'm not a heavy fruit eater. I'd say my diet across the board is about a third carb, a third fat, and a third protein as a general rule. Sometimes it deviates a little bit up or down depending on my mood, but I don't count it so terribly meticulously all the time. But you know, I also listen to what my body says. So there will be times where my body is craving, you know, a steak, for example, and I'll have one, and I'll feel more energy and I'll feel more vitality, you know, with those cravings. So part of it is, you know, we match our diet to our lifestyle as well. So we match it to our training. So if I'm doing a heavier training week, I might eat more protein that week. If I'm taking a week off, I might back off a little bit on the protein and even back off a little bit on the calories. But food is typically, in our house, it's really simple. It's usually some type of meat, whether that be beef, chicken, turkey, pork. We raise our own beef and we raise our own pigs. And so, you know, I can ensure good quality in that regard. And then it's some variety of vegetable. And then it's also some variety of nut, whether it be almonds or pecans. We have pecan trees on our farm, so that comes pretty easy in our household. And then it's some variety of fruit, usually whatever's in season. Right now, blueberries are in season, so my blueberry bushes are blossoming nicely and producing good fruit. We've got some strawberries coming in as well. So, you know, nothing too gourmet or fancy in that regard. I don't know if that's helpful for you, but that's a general basis. Will taking bile salt TIDCA improve a leaky gut or make it worse? Again, I think you have to ask the different question. It's, why do you have leaky gut? I don't think taking a bile salt is going to solve why you have leaky gut. So taking it, it's not going to make it better. You might feel symptomatic improvements in some ways, but it isn't going to change the nature of why that happened. If you have muscle inflammation in the arm and then it moves to the back, is it possible, or is that possible, or is it not related? It could be related. I mean, the nerves, it just depends on what area of the back. So, you know, you have shared neurological distribution down your spinal cord, and so the muscles that feed your arm, or rather the nerves that feed the muscles in your arm, are similar to the nerves that feed the muscles in your paraspinal in your thoracic spine and your lower cervical spine. So there could be some corollary, in that regard with the inflammation, neurologically speaking, if you've got spinal imbalance. But there's a lot to unpack there. I think you could say that they're related. You could also say they're not. What can you do for an upper tooth infection? See your dentist is the first thing you should do, and make sure what you're actually dealing with. I think what a lot of people try to do naturally. One thing on that is silver. I like to, if I ever feel like a tooth infection could be coming on, or like pain in the gum, I will take orally some hydrolyzed silver and I will rinse out that area. Really, more than anything, I'll hold that liquid in the mouth and hold it there for a good minute, and then I'll swish it around, and I might even put some silver in my gosh, I'm brain farting on the name. It's the machine that runs the water. It's the water pick. Thank you. Anyway, I might put some silver in my water pick and then run it between the gum lines as well. You can also use peroxide, a food grade peroxide, in that regard. But ultimately, you need to get it checked out, because you don't want to mess around with a tooth infection. You don't want to let something like that get out of control. Any update on Warrior Bread? I'm being told end of this month. So those of you that have been waiting patiently, I appreciate your patience. We're pretty frustrated with the supplier, but we're supposed to have it back in stock end of month. What foods and supplements can improve the mucosa in the stomach? Well, food-wise, I mean, any good solid food that you're not allergic to that has nutrients in it is going to help supply nutrients to the lining of the stomach and be beneficial. But if you're talking about things that can actually act as coating agents that will actually coat or line the stomach and the intestines, aloe is a good example. Okra is another one. Marshmallow root, licorice or deglycerinized licorice to be specific. L-glutamine, so foods rich in L-glutamine can be beneficial because they supply the fuel source. They are the fuel source itself for the intestinal cells. So all those are good in that regard. A good source of calcium is bone. One of the best ways to get bone in your life is pressure cooker. And you can take, like a really good source of calcium is fish. You can pressure cook the whole fish, and the bone becomes so soft you can eat it. And if you like sardines, some people love sardines, and so eating the whole sardine, they're pressure cooked, so that bone, you can chew it right up, and it goes right down, and it's super rich in calcium. What causes bad armpit odor? That's a relative thing, isn't it, Natalie? Some people have, I say, some people just have stronger body odor than others. And so I don't know if that's what you're referring to, or if you began having different odor that was, more and more progressively worse. Now, this is common in people that are being bombarded by an environment that's full of toxic exposures. And so there are a lot of different toxins that have the potential to change the smell of your armpit or your sweat itself. One of the hallmarks that I see on a really regular basis is people that are in mold. That changes the body odor, and the way when they come out through the sweat, it changes the way people can smell. So that would be something to consider. If I take 5,000 units of vitamin D, can I still do the vitamin D3 protocol for a cold or flu? Yeah, you can. Just during the protocol for the flu, if you go to the 50,000 unit capsules, just stop taking the 5,000 units as well. You don't need to do both, but generally that vitamin D therapy is just a 3-day therapy, so you get through that, and that'll give you a good boost. But there's no danger in doing that in the short term. And if you are concerned about it, maybe you have a kidney disease and you have a little bit more concern about your vitamin D, then check your 25-OHD levels. Ask your doctor to check your 25-OHD levels beforehand. Is it possible to absorb iodine from the ocean air when walking in the ocean? I don't know. I don't know that that's ever been studied to my knowledge. I've not seen any research related to skin absorption of iodine from the ocean directly. I mean, we can absorb iodine through the skin when we're talking about it medicinally. So plausibly that could make sense, but I couldn't answer that, confidently, with a scientific mind and tell you, yeah, you'll get all the iodine you need by going swimming in the ocean. Go up somebody's asking about a remediation service for mold. I don't have one that I can really recommend. Not because I couldn't, but because I don't like to get involved in that for a number of reasons. One is that I've got a big target on my back. Because of my stance on natural medicine, a lot of people don't like me and don't like our message, and that's why, if you guys have noticed, our YouTube channel has failed to grow for 3 years in a row, and we just now got uncensored. And if you look at our growth in the last week, I think we've added 20,000 subscribers. That being said, there's a conflict of interest that I want to try to avoid in doing that. What I would suggest that you do is contact good attorneys in your area who represent mold cases and ask who are the good remediators, the ones that do a good job. You might also contact, there are different architects that specialize in mold, and you might ask if they have recommendations for that as well. But those would be good places to start. And always start locally, because a lot of these companies that are located all over the chain-like companies, you have to be careful with those kinds of general recommendations, because a chain in one city might not be as good as a chain in another. The quality and the service and the employees may all be very different, and the experience may be very different. So you really want to get a good local company that comes highly recommended. Is it true we have to have greens to help feed gut microbes? I think that's different for different people. I don't think that's 100% true. I think there are a percentage of people that can survive on an absence of plant-based nutrition, and I think there are people that can't. That being said, I also like to default back to moderation of, all things being equal. Carbs, fats, and proteins are the three macronutrient sources, and you're not going to get that carbohydrate source. And although a lot of people will tell you carbohydrates are not essential, I would argue and disagree that they absolutely are essential. There are nutrients there that you need. There are certain sugars that you do need, and you need to get from food, but that's another matter. My point is, greens are not a bad thing. There's an attack, just like we've always seen in the past. We saw an attack on fat, and then so it was the low-fat diet, right? And then we saw the attack on carbs, with the keto diet, and now we're seeing the attack on plant-based toxins, with the carnivore diet. And I think we see these shifts and these changes within our cultures because there are percentages of people who tend to do better going one direction or the other direction. Even people that attack meat that want to go more of a plant-based direction, a lot of those people feel better, and that's why they feel adamant that it was the right thing for them. I think it's really hard to generalize. I think that's where we get in trouble, is when we try to force everybody into the same box. Can drinking wine contribute to seborrheic dermatitis? Yes, it can. I just found out I have MTHFR mutation, and it has been causing a lot of my mast cell issues. I would disagree. I've not yet seen the case where MTHFR caused mast cell problems. Most people have mast cell problems, at least this is just my experience, because they have a mold issue. An environmental mold issue is one of the biggest triggers for mast cell problems. Now, vitamin C deficiency can contribute to mast cell problems, and gluten sensitivity can contribute to mast cell problems. But the vast majority of the population has an MTHFR mutation, including myself. I'm homozygous with an MTHFR mutation, and it's never at one time in my life affected my health. And I've done thousands and thousands and thousands of these types of tests on patients over the years, and I've not yet seen a person who needed to supplement methylfolate over their mutation where it led to a dramatic change in their health or resolve their problem without addressing their diet and without addressing their toxic burden in their environment. So anyway, don't be so hasty to blame MTHFR is my point. A lot of practitioners out there trying to blame your genes on your illness, and that doesn't serve you. It's one thing to know you have it and know, okay, so what does an MTHFR mutation mean? Basically, it means that you don't methylate folate, and really the methylation cycle might be somewhat compromised. Now compromised is a, what's the best word to use here? Compromise is too strong of a word. I would say that you have a genetic predisposition to not methylating as well as somebody who doesn't have that mutation. That doesn't necessarily make you sick or mean you're going to be sick. But what it does mean is you have a greater susceptibility if you surround yourself by environmental poisons and you tax that MTHFR system by exposing it to more poisons. You are going to be predisposed to be the one that gets sick before the person who doesn't have that mutation. But just the mutation in and of itself doesn't make you sick. Okay. Let's see. Can having implants reverse autoimmune disease? If the implants are the driving factor behind it, yes. So I think that's the key. It's implants can cause autoimmune disease, but they're not necessarily your cause. So that's why having them put in, you want to think twice, but having them removed, you also possibly want to think twice. This goes back to get your material safety data sheet, know what the ingredients of your implants are, cross-reference what you're reactive to, and if it matches your implant, then now you at least have an objective reason to put yourself under that. Let's see. Oh, there it is. So yeah, I think Jessica chimed in on the olive oil. For Jessica asked that question earlier. So Pitcholine, I think that's right. I think that is the brand. So there you go, Jessica Lee, Pitcholine olive oil. That name is right. So that's the one. How much water is too much when it comes to daily water consumption and losing minerals and micronutrients to the kidneys and the urine? It's different for different people. There's some general formulations that many have come up with. I think it's one of those things. It's individualized based on how much you sweat, how much you exercise, how much you breathe. Because these are all ways we lose water, right? Is water is lost through vapor, through the skin, through sweating. It's lost as we breathe. So the more we talk, the more we breathe, the more water loss we're going to have, the more we exercise. So I can't give you an exact on how much is too much. I would say if you're going to the bathroom, excessively to urinate, you're probably approximating too much. I think the other is the quality of the water that you drink. So if you're drinking RO water with a more acidic pH because the minerals are removed from it during the RO process, that can actually dehydrate you. So that drinking that kind of water without remineralizing it, in some cases can create some level of dehydration for folks. So it's, I've always encouraged people who use RO, and I like RO filters because if you live in the city, they pull fluoride out, and you want that fluoride out of your water, but you need to add electrolyte back to it. So again, quantitatively, I think, pay attention to how many times you're having to run to the bathroom, and if it feels like you don't have a life because you're constantly peeing, then you're probably drinking too much water. But if you're drinking RO water, that can accelerate that. So make sure you add minerals to your RO water if that's what you've got. And we have a formula called Ultra Electrolytes that we recommend for RO water. Can kids do no grain, no pain? Yes, absolutely. Okay, so question is about long COVID. What can you do about long COVID? It's interesting. I'm writing right now a research piece on this very topic. It's a common question that we've been getting. And so I would say nutrition support, number one, be on the no grain, no pain diet. There's actually some compelling research now that's come out that says that people with long COVID feel better when they go gluten-free. There's also a group of researchers who've recently reported they believe because of COVID that many people will have or develop celiac disease because the spike protein appears like it can cause an intestinal permeability that can accelerate the timeline toward reacting to gluten. So there's this belief that we're going to see an onslaught or slew of people developing gluten sensitivities after becoming ill. So a gluten-free diet, and there are a number of different mechanisms in that, and that's what we're mapping out for people. But I would say if you're struggling in that regard, no grain, no pain would be a good starting place for your diet. Beyond that, supplementally, high doses of vitamin C, 5 grams a day, and in some cases more. N-acetylcysteine is, in my opinion, absolutely invaluable. And these types of folks, we use this very aggressively. I've seen in the last year about 100 cases of this as a problem. And so N-acetylcysteine is something I've found to be a very profound impact for a lot of folks. So start with those two things and start with diet change. A lot of the other stuff I haven't really seen be all that beneficial. I'm not going to go into depth here. We could probably do a whole show on that topic. Why do I get awful gas just from drinking a glass of water? You probably have a dysbiosis, Susan. If drinking water causes excessive bloating or gas, you've probably got a dysbiosis issue. So ask your doctor to measure your microbiome. What's normal in regards to gas production? Is it normal to not have gas? No, every human has gas and flatulence. It should come up both ends, especially within proximity of eating. I don't think anybody's ever really set out and defined a normal or measured normal quantity of gas production. And I think partly it's because one of it depends on your microbiome, two, it depends on the types of food that you eat. Some foods are more gaseous forming, like cruciferous vegetables as an example. And some people's microbiomes do poorly with certain foods and produce more gas as a result of exposure to those foods. That's largely what the group of people that do well on low FODMAP diets struggle with. So I don't think we would say, okay, let's define how much gas is normal. Although I would argue for a lot of people is how much is normal for you typically, and if that dramatically changes at a point in your life, then you probably need to get it checked out. How to improve bone spurs? Well, bone grows based on pressure. So where most people develop bone spurs is because they have the abnormal pressure on the bone, on the area of the bone, and so the spur starts to grow in response to that pressure. So the biggest driving force in my experience, and one of the more common types of bone spurs, is a heel spur, so on the heel. And that type of spur is largely caused by people who are overweight, because that abundance of weight is going to put more pressure on the heel and create or coerce the bone to grow and form a spur. We also see a lot of spurs in people's spines, and this also has to do with poor posture and excessive weight. So I would say, stretch. Yoga is a great way to start. Yoga is just basically it's a stretching routine. I know it's more than that, but many people find the benefits of yoga-style stretching very invaluable for their help with bone spurs, and I would encourage you to start there as a tool to help you improve. Toenail fungus, how to cure it. I think I'm going to do a whole show on that because that's a common one. But very simply, find out why your immune system is being suppressed, that you're capable of growing toenail fungus. Toenail fungus is fungus growing on your skin or under your nail beds is usually those are opportunistic fungi, meaning that they really can only grow when your immune system is not strong enough to handle them. One of the things you can begin the process of, and one of the things I like to do, take caprylic acid orally, We can put a link up to ultra caprylic acid. So you can use that. It's a very safe supplement to use. It has antifungal properties. And take a good probiotic as well. But then soak your toe in peroxide twice a day and soak it for, about 5 minutes. But also, you want to make sure that you set up an environment where it's harder for fungus to continue to grow under that nail bed. And so what provides an environment for fungal growth is moisture and darkness and heat, which is, people that wear socks and shoes, right? I mean, most people wear socks and shoes. So, try to spend an inordinate amount of time outside of socks and shoes and in the sunlight, because sunlight also makes it harder for fungus to grow. And fungus can grow in the sun, but it makes it harder. So walk barefoot outside, peroxide, consider caprylic acid and a good probiotic, but ultimately go back and ask yourself, why is my immune system allowing this fungus to grow on my body? Best for ulcers, depends on what's causing the ulcer. Again, a lot of things, are masks, right? You can use marshmallow root and deglycerinized licorice and aloe, are all good to coat and line the intestines or stomach if there is an ulcer. But ultimately, the ulcer was caused for a reason. So what was that cause? For some people, the ulcers are caused by a bacteria called Helicobacter pylori. For some, it's yeast overgrowth. For some, it's their food sensitivities. Gluten can do it. So, cabbage juice is great, but I would say figure out why it grew, why that ulcer formed in the first place before you just start trying to cover it up. Or you can have mycotoxins in the body from a moldy house from years ago. I don't agree, Barbara, 100% with that. I mean, it's possible, it's plausible. But mycotoxins, most of them have a relatively short half-life. I think the longest one, ochratoxin, has a half-life of like 37 days. So if you've been out of mold for 5 years and you're coming back with high levels of mycotoxins, I would suspect your current environment more than I would suspect a potential for it to come from past historical exposure. Again, years later, I would disagree. Your body has the ability and the capacity to push those out. Now. There's a lot of nuance to that as well, but so that's a generalized answer. Oh, let's see here. I eat animal fat, no weight gain, must not be the same as carb fats. Not a question, more of a comment. Opinion on Nourishing Traditions cookbook. I think it's a great book. I think Sally Fallon does a great job of keeping Weston Price's message of good nutrition and traditional nutrition alive. I think part of the cookbook, it depends on what you're allergic to as well. I mean, a lot of people, they want to ferment their grains or they want to sprout their grains and eat them, and if they're gluten sensitive, that isn't going to work. But sprouting foods before you eat them, especially difficult to digest foods, can be very valuable. Eating whole and real foods, and I think Sally does a great job, like I said, of translating that for folks and making it accessible. Because that, is one of the best books ever written on nutrition was written by Weston Price. And that book is called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. And so if you haven't read that and you really want to learn more about nutrition, historically speaking, it's a fantastic read. And it's not a super high vocabulary read where you have to understand all the Latin medical terminology to be able to get through it. So really good read. H. pylori, don't want to take the 3 antibiotics. If you're, well, don't construe this as medical advice, Norma, but what some people really find beneficial when they've had a diagnosis of H. pylori is bismuth, a form of bismuth. As a supplement, bismuth can actually coat, so if you have an ulcer, it can coat the lining of the stomach and help reduce some of that painfulness that you might be experiencing. Berberine as a natural, uva ursi is natural, high dose oregano, or these are all different things. Silver, can also be effective. But I mean, there are a lot of different natural things that have antibiotic properties in the realm of what we would call ancient medicine that you could look into and make an attempt. But I would suggest you get with somebody who's really well versed in it and get direct guidance, because the long-term risk of an H. pylori issue can be, the ulceration, but also, once you have that ulcer, those cells can start to morph and become cancerous, and so that is one of the long-term risks of letting it go. So you don't want to just let it go indefinitely without good help. Okay, it's about that time. My belly's telling me it's time for me to go eat. I'm going to go do that. Today it's hamburger. I think somebody was asking me about my food, but it's mostly hamburger, and I think I've got a baggie of blueberries in there from my home bushes. So I'm going to go eat. You guys have a fantastic weekend. Make sure you come back and visit me on Tuesday. We've got a great show coming up on toxic metals that you're not going to want to miss. And then next week we'll be back here again on Thursday at 12:30 for live Q&A sessions, as we are here every Thursday. And do me a favor, if you like what you're getting in the show, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you share this information with 10 friends. Our goal here is to save 100 million lives. I can't do that without your help. Now that the censorship is up, let's see how far we can take it. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week.